Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Bible School. My name's Josh Terry, and if you're just tuning in with us, we're studying the book of Acts and how to be a first century Christian in a 21st century world. And we're taking the lessons that we're learning from the book of Acts and trying to apply them to our life and our culture today. So, as we've been studying Acts, we're now in Acts chapter 10. And this past Sunday, we read through Acts chapter 10, and I gave a brief summary. And we talked about in our Zoom class the contrast between Jews and Gentiles and how it would be hard for a Jew to let a Gentile into the faith. And so God sent this huge sign of the Holy Spirit being poured out on top of them so that it was justifiable for them to be into the Christian faith. And this was a big moment because it really brought home the fact that Christianity is for everyone. So today I want to talk about that fact, and the way I want to go about that is through the subject of discrimination. Now, I understand that I'm not the best person to be talking about this. I have one story of being discriminated against, and that's it. And that was just because of who I was. It wasn't because I looked a certain way or am a certain way. So, I want to talk about all forms of discrimination, and I understand that this is a hot topic. Anyone that ever says that the Bible doesn't still apply to our life didn't read it enough, because obviously, if discrimination was a problem back then, and we see it still today, we see that there is a connection here. Now, I understand this is a hot topic because Ahmaud Arbery was just recently, his shooters were recently arrested and the trial was about to begin. And I want to say that this is a big topic, and I'm just going to be covering just a little brief section of it. So in the Bible, we're reading about Jews and Gentiles, and we talked about how they didn't mix very well, especially when it came to religion. And so Peter going in and seeing a Gentile and seeing the Holy Spirit poured out upon them was a big deal. If you have ever been persecuted, I want to tell you the story of the one time that I was persecuted. And it wasn't even a serious persecution, it just hurt my feelings. But if you've ever been persecuted, I'm sorry. And that's a big ordeal. But if you've ever been persecuted by people that you thought you should be able to trust, that's a bigger ordeal. So I'm going to tell you the story about the one time that I was persecuted. And it wasn't even because of who I was or what I looked like. It was just because of my thoughts and my beliefs. I remember it was my junior year of college, and I was taking an upper level philosophy class. And in that philosophy class, I sat in the very back, and I was the first one in the room, sat down, and a girl came in and she sat next to me. Now, I've had this philosophy teacher before. I thought he was an okay guy, didn't really have a whole lot of interaction with him, but, I had no problems with the teacher. And then a group of philosophy students come in and they sit down at the very front right of the classroom. And they are notably separated from me and this one girl who was not a philosophy major, and there were several seats in between us and them. And it was very interesting while we were in class. We'd been in class for about 2 weeks. And the philosophy teacher was sitting on the front. And about 2 weeks into the class, he tells the girl that she should move up closer to the other group and be on the front row. And now let me justify this point. I had already made point and with this professor that I was a Christian, and these were some of my beliefs. And when she was told to come up to the front, she looked and said, "Well, what about him?" and pointed at me. And he said, "He's a Christian. I know what he believes. He can just stay in the back." And moved her up. I had never in my life felt persecuted like that. So I was very angry and upset, and I was in a huff about it. And I went home to my apartment, and my roommate was there, and I was telling him about it. And I was like, can you believe that? And he was like, man, that is awesome. Good for you. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he looked at me and said, you were persecuted for Jesus' name's sake. Blessed are those who are persecuted. And I was like, wow. I'd been looking at this all the wrong way. It's important for us to realize that persecution comes in many different forms. There is persecution because of the way you look. Maybe you're of a different ethnicity, Hispanic, African American, Middle Eastern, whatever. Persecution comes from that. Persecution comes because of your beliefs, because you believe in one thing or don't believe in another. Persecution comes from the way that you dress. If you dress all in black and you relate to a gothic emo group, people persecute you for that stuff. There are persecutions all over. Some persecutions are greater than others. But I want to talk about, one, have you yourself ever been persecuted? If so, what for? I told you my story about being persecuted in college for believing in something. But I want to know, have you ever been persecuted because you were a cheerleader and somebody thought you were really dumb? Or you were a football player and someone thought you were really dumb? Have you ever been persecuted because you were supposed to be the smart kid? Or you were supposed to be the good kid? Or you were supposed to be this? And somebody persecutes you for that. And by persecution, I just mean they leave you out of something. They accuse you of doing something. Maybe you were persecuted because you were a bad kid in middle school, but you've changed your life and you've gotten better. Has this ever happened to anybody out there? I want to know. We're meeting in our Zoom class this Wednesday night at 7 o'clock for the junior high and then 7:30 for the senior high. Have you ever been persecuted? My second question is, how should we, as Christians, respond to persecution? Whether it be us being persecuted for our beliefs, or whether it be our friends being persecuted because of the way they look or the way they act. How should we respond to persecution? I'm interested to see what you have to say. There's a lot of ways this conversation can go, but I want it to be open and honest. Racism, persecution, discriminating against people is a huge issue. And I want to discuss it with you and see where you think things are going, how we should act, how we should respond. Thanks again for tuning in, and you just got Bible schooled.